There is a certain kind of quiet that only small American towns know. A quiet that feels harmless on the surface porches lit by soft bulbs, kids pedaling down empty streets, the church bell marking each passing hour. But underneath that stillness is another pulse entirely. Something older, something patient.
Something that waits for the full moon to rise before it remembers its hunger.
And in 1985, one film tried to capture that feeling not through spectacle, not through polished mythology, but through a story that understood how terror can bloom in the most ordinary places. Silver Bullet was not just a werewolf movie. It was a portrait of a community cracking under the weight of secrets. A story shaped by Stephen King during a period where he was wrestling with his own darkness and brought to life by a production haunted by creative clashes, vanished footage, and a creature design that changed so many times it nearly derailed the entire film. What emerged was a strange hybrid part coming-of-age tale, part monster movie, part elegy for an America that existed only in memory. And yet, behind its familiar 80s charm lies a tangled web of decisions, incidents, and accidents that most viewers never knew happened. Because Silver Bullet wasn't meant to look the way it does. It wasn't meant to sound the way it sounds. Even the werewolf, perhaps the most mocked creature of its decade, was not the creature that the filmmakers originally intended. Almost everything that made it to the screen was a result of compromised luck or an argument someone eventually surrendered. These are the hidden threads, the things obscured by the moonlight. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about Silver Bullet 1985. FACT1. The first strange truth about Silver Bullet is that the film was never meant to have the tone audiences eventually saw. Its original creative direction leaned toward something much darker, almost suffocating, closer to a psychological study of small-town paranoia than a straight monster picture. Stephen King's early screenplay drafts were more violent, more fatalistic, and less forgiving toward the townspeople, portraying them not as victims of a creature, but as accomplices in their own downfall. This version emphasized the idea that the werewolf was not the source of terror, but merely the mirror held up to reveal what the town already was. However, this direction quickly clashed with the studio's fears that such a film would be too bleak to market. Producers pushed for more traditional scares and a clearer moral structure, trimming scenes that suggested the town harbored its own quiet evils unrelated to the beast. Some of the early material hinted that certain characters suspected the killer long before the first attack, but chose silence because they benefited from the anonymity the chaos created. Those implications were removed, along with several dialogue exchanges that questioned the role of faith, authority, and guilt in the community. But traces of that abandoned version linger. The sudden tonal shifts, the abrupt moral judgments, and the moments where the town seems afraid of itself rather than the monster all stem from the original script's DNA. You can still feel the ghost of the film King wanted, one where the most dangerous thing under the full moon wasn't the werewolf. It was the people it hunted. FACT2. Silver Bullet's production troubles are often summarized as creative differences, but the truth is far stranger and far more chaotic. The project went through an unusual tug-of-war between voices who fundamentally disagreed on what the werewolf should represent. Some argued it should be a tragic figure, a symbol of uncontrollable addiction. Others insisted it should be a looming mythic presence, nearly supernatural in its detachment. And Stephen King, caught in the middle, wanted it to reflect the treacherous duality of everyday people, the idea that monstrosity could wear a familiar face without warning. This ideological clash didn't stay on paper. It manifested physically on set, shaping the pacing and tone of entire sequences. Scenes were shot in different emotional registers, depending on which creative voice had influenced that week. One day, the werewolf was filmed like a terrifying predator. The next, like a misunderstood creature deserving sympathy. Some actors privately confessed that they didn't know which version of the story they were performing in because direction changed almost daily. The confusion reached its peak when several key scenes were reshot without informing certain crew members. This resulted in mismatched continuity, emotional beats that no longer aligned, and a final product that feels oddly disjointed in places, as though two different films are fighting beneath the surface. Yet this very dissonance gives Silver Bullet its peculiar charm. The contradictions create tension, unpredictability, and a sense that the story is always slightly off balance. Ironically, the film's fractured production produced a tone that perfectly matches its themes: a town divided by fear, a monster divided by identity, a script divided by intent. The real chaos wasn't the werewolf's doing. It was everyone trying to decide what it should be. FACT3. Perhaps the most surprising truth about Silver Bullet is that the werewolf suit, infamous among fans for its odd, almost docile appearance, was never the monster's original design. Early concept art revealed a creature far more grotesque, inspired by anatomical sketches of malformed wolves and exaggerated predatory features. Its limbs were elongated, its jaw asymmetrical, and its posture unnaturally human. The intention was clear: to create something that evoked not just fear, but discomfort, the kind that blurs the line between familiar and wrong. But when the practical effects team attempted to build the creature, they discovered that the ambitious design severely limited the performer's ability to move. The animatronics malfunctioned during test footage. The suit's weight caused balance issues so severe that the actor inside reportedly fell repeatedly during trial runs. Camera tests showed a creature that looked intimidating only when perfectly still. The moment it moved, the illusion fell apart. Worse, some early test shots unintentionally made the monster appear comedic. Producers panicked. Under mounting pressure and an accelerating schedule, the effects department was forced to abandon the complex design and replace it with something simpler, more functional, and unfortunately less frightening. This last-minute change led to the infamous bear-like werewolf that audiences still debate today. Fans often mock its appearance, unaware that behind it lies a series of failed experiments, physical injuries, and near disasters that left the crew scrambling for a solution. And so, the creature that was meant to be unnerving became something else entirely, a reminder that sometimes the scariest part of filmmaking isn't the monster you build, but the moment you realize it cannot become what you imagine. FACT4. One of the strangest behind-the-scenes stories from Silver Bullet involves a sequence that was meant to define the film's sense of terror, but ended up becoming one of its most difficult and costly failures. Early in production, the director planned a night chase scene in which the werewolf would move with an unsettling, almost gliding motion, something that felt unnatural but not supernatural. To accomplish this, the effects team developed a custom rig that allowed the performer to be pulled across the ground at high speed, simulating an inhuman gait. It was intricate, dangerous, and wildly ambitious for a mid-budget horror film of the 1980 ES. But the test run went catastrophically wrong. The harness malfunctioned, causing the performer inside the suit to be yanked forward with excessive force, resulting in a shoulder injury that halted filming for days. The rig itself broke on impact, and repairing it proved more expensive than building an entirely new system. The production fell behind schedule, tempers flared, and the director was pressured to abandon the idea altogether. Instead of the eerie glide originally envisioned, the final film settled for more conventional werewolf movements, simple lunges, and charges filmed from safer angles. What's fascinating is that traces of the original concept remain in the final edit. Some shots linger a little too long on the werewolf's upper body, trying to recapture the controlled motion the rig was meant to provide. Other moments cut abruptly, evidence of footage that could no longer be used because the sequence was never completed. For audiences, the scene is merely one more nighttime attack. But for the crew, it represented a vision too dangerous to achieve a reminder that sometimes the most haunting ideas are the ones the camera never gets to see. FACT 5. A lesser-known truth about Silver Bullet is that its most emotional performance may have come from a place of genuine fear rather than acting. Haim, who played Marty Kozlow, was already known for his talent and natural screen presence. He was still a young actor navigating a set filled with adults who didn't always have patience for his age or energy. During one pivotal night shoot, Haim was asked to react to the werewolf appearing suddenly at his window. The script required terror, desperation, and a sense of helplessness so intense that the audience would believe Marty truly understood he might die. The problem was that Haim had become familiar with the werewolf suit and was no longer frightened by it. To solve this, the director made a controversial decision. He instructed the effects team to bring out an early rejected version of the werewolf head, one considered too grotesque and disturbing for the final film. It had uneven teeth, exposed mechanisms beneath the fur, and eyes that didn't track in unison. It was unsettling in a way the final creature never managed to be. Haim wasn't warned. When the crew revealed the monstrous prototype during the take, his reaction was instant and raw. His breath caught, his voice cracked, and his movements lacked the controlled performance of a seasoned actor. It was authentic panic. The director loved it. The take was used in the final film, even though some crew members questioned whether the tactic crossed a line. To this day, fans praise the realism of that moment, unaware that the terror came not from method acting or dramatic coaching, but from a glimpse of a creature that was never meant to survive the cutting room floor. FACT 6. One of the most quietly controversial changes to Silver Bullet came not from the studio, not from the director, and not even from Stephen King, but from a single producer who believed the film needed a more uplifting emotional core. The original script portrayed Marty's relationship with his Uncle Red as unstable, unreliable, and laced with a sadness that mirrored the decay of the town itself. Uncle Red was written as a flawed man whose humor masked a deep sense of failure. Their bond was meant to feel fragile, a reminder that some connections survive not because they are strong, but because they have nowhere else to go. But the producer insisted this dynamic was too heavy for mainstream audiences. Without consulting King, he pushed for rewrites that softened Red's character, giving him a more heroic presence and removing references to the darker aspects of his personal life. Several scenes that showed Red struggling with guilt and self-destruction were cut, including an emotional monologue that explained why he felt so protective of Marty. The rewritten version shifted the tone from melancholic to sentimental, transforming the uncle into a kind of unlikely guardian angel rather than a damaged man trying to atone for his failures. The ripple effect was significant. The emotional tension between the characters diminished, and the film lost an undercurrent of tragic realism that King had originally woven into the narrative. Some of the surviving scenes still hint at that earlier version, moments where Red's eyes linger too long or his jokes feel like shields. But the depth was buried, replaced with a more comforting portrait that fit the studio's expectations. The irony, of course, is that audiences still sense the shadows beneath the rewrite. The truth of the character never vanished. It simply slipped between the lines, waiting for anyone who cared to look. FACT 7. One of the most debated mysteries in Silver Bullet's production is the abrupt departure of its original director, Daniel Attias. Official statements at the time described the change as a natural shift in creative leadership, but those who worked on the film tell a very different story. Attias reportedly clashed with producers from the earliest stages of shooting, particularly over the pacing and tone of the werewolf scenes. He envisioned a slow burn horror film, something closer to a mood piece, while the studio demanded bigger scares, faster cuts, and clearer action. The disagreements escalated during the filming of a complex nighttime sequence involving multiple practical effects and deep fog. Attias insisted on 17 takes, each one slightly adjusting lighting and movement to capture the precise dread he believed the film needed. Producers considered it a waste of time and money. Tempers flared, the atmosphere soured. Rumors circulated that one executive threatened to shut the production down for a week if Attias didn't speed up. The breaking point came when Attias refused to shoot a version of a key scene that the studio demanded a more aggressive, marketable attack shot designed to mimic popular creature features of the time. Attias reportedly said he wouldn't turn the film into something he considered shallow. Within days, he was gone. What's remarkable is that traces of his directorial style still remain in the final cut scenes, with unusually still camera work, long shadows, and a kind of eerie patience that feels out of sync with the rest of the movie. These fragments betray the story of a film made by two directors who never shared the same vision. The werewolf may be the monster on screen, but the real split was behind the camera. Fact 8. One of the strangest pieces of lost history from Silver Bullet involves a scene that almost no one outside the production has ever seen. In early script drafts, there was a moment meant to explore the psychological breakdown of the townspeople as paranoia spread. The scene took place during a community gathering and outdoor church service where residents quietly accused one another of harboring secrets. The werewolf does not appear, but the sense of danger is palpable. The sequence was filmed, and according to crew members, it was haunting. Extras whispered improvised dialogue about suspicious neighbors, missing pets, and nighttime noises no one wanted to explain. The preacher delivered a sermon about moral decay, his voice trembling as though he knew something terrible was coming. The camera slowly tracked across faces filled with doubt and fear, capturing the emotional fracture that the script intended to emphasize. But when the studio screened the footage, they panicked. Executives felt the scene was too depressing, and more importantly, feared it made the townspeople look complicit rather than innocent victims. They wanted the threat to be external, a monster, not a reflection of the community's own rot. The scene was cut entirely. Its removal weakened the thematic foundation of the film, making the town feel reactive rather than morally complex. The footage was supposedly archived, but no known copy has resurfaced. Some believe it was intentionally destroyed to prevent further debate. Others claim frames from the scene still exist in a mislabeled storage reel somewhere in Paramount's vault. What remains is only the memory of a lost moment that might have made Silver Bullet far more unsettling than the version we know.
Sometimes the scariest scenes are the ones the studio refuses to let you see.
Fact 9. Few fans realize that Silver Bullet nearly featured a practical transformation sequence that would have placed it alongside the most iconic werewolf films of its time. Early in production, the effects team began developing an elaborate multi-stage transformation that involved animatronic limbs, inflatable bladders, and stop-motion enhancements. The sequence would have shown Reverend Lowe changing form in agonizing detail, his bones contorting, his skin stretching, and his human features dissolving into something feral. It was designed to be the film's centerpiece. But the ambitions of the concept quickly collided with the reality of time and budget. The animatronics failed repeatedly during tests, sometimes deflating prematurely or locking into stiff positions. The makeup team struggled with continuity as each stage required hours of preparation and any mistake meant restarting from scratch. Stop-motion tests looked promising, but the studio rejected them for being too jarring compared to live-action footage. Every solution created new problems. Weeks were lost, money drained, and the sequence was ultimately abandoned, leaving only brief hints of transformation achieved with basic crossfades and simple effects. For a film rooted in the body horror of becoming something monstrous, this was a devastating compromise. What's eerie is that evidence of the abandoned work still exists. A few still photographs show grotesque partial transformations, limbs in mid-twist skin warped into unnatural patterns. These images never made it to public marketing, likely because they belonged to a version of Silver Bullet that no longer existed. In the end, the film's most ambitious idea was reduced to a whisper. Ironically, the transformation that might have defined the movie instead became the moment it quietly surrendered to its limitations. FACT 10. One of the most overlooked but revealing moments in Silver Bullet's production came from an unexpected source, the sound department. In the original plan, the werewolf's vocalizations were meant to be a blend of animalistic growls and distorted human sounds, symbolizing the creature's dual nature. The team spent weeks gathering recordings of wolves, bears, and even camels to create a hybrid roar that felt both primal and familiar. But none of these experiments captured the tragic undertone the filmmakers wanted. It was then that a sound engineer proposed using something unusual: recordings of real human panic. Not staged screams, but genuine distress captured during controlled tests for unrelated research breathing patterns, choked gasps, and involuntary vocalizations made under stress. Ethically questionable, emotionally disturbing, but undeniably powerful. The idea was to layer these human elements beneath the creature's growl so subtly that the audience wouldn't consciously hear them but would feel them. The effect was haunting. When the werewolf growled, there was a faint, almost subconscious suggestion of human suffering beneath the surface, a reminder that the beast was once a man. But when the studio reviewed the audio, they deemed it too upsetting, arguing that it risked pushing the film from horror into something uncomfortably real. They ordered the human layers removed. Still, not all traces vanished. Some quiet moments retain the ghost of that original concept, brief, unsettling breaths mixed into the soundscape. Most viewers never notice them, but those who do often report the same reaction: a sudden, inexplicable sadness just before the fear sets in. It's the echo of an idea the studio tried to bury, still clawing at the edges of the soundtrack. FACT 11. What many fans never realize is that Silver Bullet's most iconic location, the fog-drenched forest where several of the attacks take place, was never meant to look that way. The heavy mist that defines those scenes wasn't part of the original visual plan. In fact, it began as a mistake. During an early night shoot, the fog machines malfunctioned and released far more smoke than intended, blanketing the entire set in a dense, impenetrable haze. Crew members panicked, believing the footage would be unusable. But when the director reviewed the playback, he noticed something unexpected. The excessive fog created a sense of spatial disorientation, making the forest seem larger, deeper, and strangely dreamlike. Figures vanished into the mist, only to emerge moments later as if stepping out of another world. The werewolf's silhouette, previously uninspiring, suddenly gained a haunting presence, more threatening in glimpses than in full view. This accidental discovery reshaped the visual identity of the entire film. The crew began experimenting with different densities and lighting angles, learning how to make the fog behave like a living entity, revealing hiding and distorting in equal measure. It became a tool for mood tension and emotional manipulation.
Scenes that felt flat were reshot with fog to amplify their atmosphere.
However, not everyone embraced the change. Some producers complained that the fog obscured too many details and made the werewolf harder to see. They feared audiences would think the crew was hiding flaws, ironically, a concern that wasn't entirely unfounded. Yet the fog remained not because it masked imperfections, but because it elevated them into something almost poetic. In the end, the film's most memorable visual motif wasn't crafted by design. It drifted into existence by accident, like a nightmare slipping through the cracks of a quiet town. FAC T12. Among the hidden struggles of Silver Bullet's production, one of the most surprising involves the film's editor, Daniel Lewenthal, who found himself navigating a mountain of contradictory footage. Because scenes were shot under competing creative visions, with tone pacing and emotional intent shifting week by week, the raw material resembled puzzle pieces from entirely different films. Lewenthal later described the editing process as trying to stitch together a dream that keeps changing shape the moment you look away. Some takes emphasized suspense, lingering on long shadows and subtle expressions. Others, often shot days later, pushed for faster rhythms, sharp cuts, and more conventional action beats. Dialogue scenes frequently contained multiple emotional interpretations, depending on which director or producer had been guiding the actors that day. The inconsistencies were so pronounced that Lewenthal had to build entire emotional arcs using fragments of performances that were never meant to coexist. The editor created what the crew jokingly called the Wall of Moods, a massive board categorizing footage by emotional temperature rather than narrative order. Calm, fearful, aggressive, melancholic, detached.
Scenes were assembled not by strict chronology, but by tonal flow, crafting a film that felt cohesive despite the chaos behind it.
But Lewenthal made one controversial choice. He deliberately allowed some tonal fractures to remain. Tiny jumps in pacing, abrupt emotional shifts, uncomfortable silences that seemed out of place. He believed these imperfections captured the psychological instability at the heart of the story, the way fear distorts perception and memory. Studio executives questioned the decision, but the director supported it. These subtle cracks in the film's rhythm are often dismissed as production flaws. Yet they might be something else entirely, the lingering fingerprints of an editor who understood that terror doesn't come from smoothness, but from the places where the mind hesitates. FAC T13. One of the most unsettling legends surrounding Silver Bullet isn't found in the script, the performances, or even the creature itself. It comes from the filming location, specifically the old railway bridge where Marty's motorized wheelchair outruns the werewolf. Local residents warned the production that the area carried a history of strange accidents. In the 1950 SA teenager vanished near the bridge and was never found. In the 1970 SA, hiker reported seeing something hunched beneath the tracks at dusk. These stories were dismissed as small-town myths, but crew members quickly learned why the locals spoke with such unease. During the shoot, several technicians reported feeling watched while setting up lighting along the riverbank. Equipment went missing only to reappear days later in locations no one recalled visiting. One camera operator claimed he saw movement in the trees long after the cast had left the set. Most disturbing of all was an incident during a nighttime test when a spotlight flickered and revealed what one crew member described as a shape, not a person, not an animal, just a shape crouching below the rails. Naturally, the studio wanted no part of these rumors. They attributed the oddities to exhaustion and long hours. But the crew began joking nervously about the bridge being the real monster of the film. Even Haim supposedly refused to stay there after dark, convinced he heard breathing in the woods. Nothing conclusive ever came from the experiences, and no official report was filed. But the production finished that sequence faster than expected, as though everyone wanted to leave the place behind. Silver Bullet may be fiction, but for those who worked on that bridge, the line between story and setting felt thinner than anyone was willing to admit. FACT14. The Reverend Lowe, portrayed with unnerving calm by Everett McGill, is often remembered as one of the most quietly terrifying villains in 1980s horror. But what most viewers don't know is that McGill approached the role with a method that unsettled even seasoned actors. Believing that the character's dual identity required complete emotional compartmentalization, he remained distant on set, avoiding casual conversation and withholding his warm, charismatic personality. Cast members described his presence as cold fog, silent, heavy, and strangely watchful. McGill reportedly kept a journal written from the Reverend's perspective, filled with confessions, rationalizations, and gentle prayers seeking forgiveness for the sins he had yet to commit. One entry leaked years later by a crew member reads, almost like a sermon delivered by someone slowly losing their mind. It contained personal justifications for each on-screen killing, written as though the Reverend truly believed he was cleansing the town rather than terrorizing it. During shooting, McGill avoided making eye contact with Haim, claiming that the predator must never acknowledge the boy until the moment fate demanded it. Even off camera, he maintained a subtle tension, walking slowly, speaking softly, keeping his hands clasped behind his back like a man wrestling with inner demons. Several actors admitted that his presence made them uneasy, unsure where the character ended and the performer began. When the final confrontation was filmed, the crew noticed something strange in McGill's performance. A momentary tremor, a flicker of grief, almost as if the character mourned what he had become. This subtle emotional conflict never appears in the script, yet it lingers in the final cut, giving the werewolf a tragic depth the film otherwise lacks. Ironically, the most human part of the monster came from an actor determined to hide his humanity. FACT15. One of the rarest artifacts connected to Silver Bullet is a series of storyboard sketches drawn by Stephen King himself. While King provided the screenplay, he occasionally contributed visual concepts when he felt strongly about a scene's symbolic weight. These sketches, rough and almost frantic in style, reveal an interpretation of the story that diverged significantly from what appeared on screen. In King's drawings, the werewolf is depicted not as a hulking beast, but as a gaunt, emaciated figure, more human than animal, with a posture suggesting suffering rather than aggression. The most striking sketch shows the creature standing in a church doorway, its long arms hanging like broken branches, its face turned downward as though ashamed of its own existence. This version of the beast was meant to convey a religious allegory, sin, wearing a familiar face, guilt, dressed in flesh. King reportedly fought to preserve this image, arguing that the werewolf should embody spiritual conflict rather than simple physical threat. Producers disagreed. They believed audiences expected a conventional monster, not a symbolic one. By the time practical effects were finalized, none of King's visual concepts remained. The werewolf became a more traditional creature, losing the haunting vulnerability he originally envisioned. The sketches were filed away unseen for decades. Years later, a handful of these drawings surfaced at a private auction and were verified as authentic by King's former assistant. The images shocked fans not because they were grotesque, but because they were heartbreaking, a reminder that King wrote Silver Bullet during a period defined by introspection, addiction, and the fear of losing oneself. In another timeline, Silver Bullet might have been a story about a monster who dreaded the night. Instead, audiences received a monster hiding from the studio, not from the moon. FACT 16. One of the most peculiar behind-the-scenes incidents from Silver Bullet involves an object so small that almost no viewer notices it. Reverend Loa's silver pendant. In the final film, it appears as a simple religious accessory, something unremarkable worn by a mild-mannered preacher. But originally, the pendant was designed to serve a symbolic purpose. Stephen King intended it to contain a tiny engraving and inscription that subtly hinted at the Reverend's torment, a message that, if caught by the audience, would foreshadow his secret identity. The original prop featured an etching in Latin: Deus Tace, sub luna plena, God is silent under the full moon. The phrase encapsulated Loa's internal conflict, suggesting a man who believed divine judgment had deserted him. When King saw the completed prop, he reportedly praised its quiet bleakness. But during test screenings, an executive noticed the inscription in a close-up shot and argued that it was too on the nose, claiming it risked making the film feel pretentious or overtly symbolic. The studio ordered the pendant redesigned overnight. The prop department scrambled to replace it with a blank, unembellished piece of metal. But an unexpected complication arose. The original pendant had already been used in multiple scenes. Continuity became a nightmare. The editors were forced to cut or reframe shots to hide inconsistencies. Some close-ups were removed entirely, altering the emotional beats of key moments. The symbolic thread that King had woven into the character's identity vanished. Yet not entirely. Attentive fans have spotted a few fleeting frames, barely noticeable, where the pendant glints just long enough to hint at a pattern on its surface. It's not clear enough to read, but it's clear enough to sense intention. A quiet reminder that even when symbolism is erased, its shadow lingers. FACT 17. Silver Bullet's most extravagant prop, the motorized wheelchair designed for Marty, nearly derailed the production in ways few people know. The Silver Bullet, as Uncle Red names, it was built with custom parts and a surprisingly powerful engine intended to give Marty a sense of agency and adrenaline that transcended his physical limitations. But the prop team quickly discovered that the machine was far more dangerous than anticipated. During one early test, a stunt performer lost control of the chair as it accelerated down a gravel path, narrowly avoiding a collision with the camera crew. The vehicle was powerful enough to shred through plywood obstacles, and its braking system, though reliable under controlled conditions, became unpredictable when exposed to moisture or uneven ground. The production was forced to rewrite several sequences to minimize high-speed stunts. But the most troubling incident occurred during a nighttime chase rehearsal. According to crew accounts, Haim, who was supposed to be nowhere near the machine, climbed into the chair between takes and attempted a short ride. No one noticed until the engine roared to life. The chair lurched forward, skidding dangerously close to the riverbank before a grip managed to intercept it. Haim was shaken but unharmed. The crew was terrified, and for the rest of the shoot, the Silver Bullet was kept under strict lock and key, guarded like a piece of sensitive weaponry. Ironically, the prop meant to represent courage and freedom for Marty became the one thing that the cast feared most. On screen, it's a symbol of defiance. Off-screen, it was a reminder that heroism sometimes comes with horsepower no one is truly prepared to handle. FACT 18. One of the eeriest occurrences during the production of Silver Bullet was an electrical malfunction that took place during a crucial night scene involving the werewolf in the woods. The sequence required a complex arrangement of lights to simulate moonbeams piercing through the dense branches. The crew had rigged an elaborate network of wires and generators along the forest path, creating an atmosphere that felt both enchanted and threatening. But as they prepared for the first take, something inexplicable happened. Without warning, every light on set flickered simultaneously, not once, but 3 times in a slow, rhythmic pulse. The generators continued humming steadily, showing no signs of overload. Yet the lights behaved as though responding to some unseen signal. When the flickering stopped, one of the smaller spotlights exploded with a sharp crack, sending shards of glass into the underbrush. No one was injured, but everyone was unnerved. The electricians inspected the equipment and found no cause for the anomaly. There were no shorts, no loose connections, no evidence of moisture. The forest was dry, the power lines stable, the generators strong. One technician later remarked that the lights behaved like something was passing through them. The incident delayed filming for hours. Crew members whispered about bad omens and local folklore. A few insisted they heard something in the woods during the blackout, a heavy, deliberate movement that didn't resemble any known animal. The official explanation cited an unidentified electrical disturbance, but the phrase convinced no one. Ironically, the final footage from that night, captured after the malfunction, has an almost otherworldly glow, as though the forest itself had been charged with invisible tension. The scene feels haunted not by the werewolf, but by whatever the lights seem to acknowledge. FACT 19. One of the most overlooked creative battles in Silver Bullet revolves around the film's musical score. The composer Jay Chataway originally envisioned a soundtrack built around discordant strings and experimental percussion, something raw, jagged, and almost animalistic. His early demos leaned heavily on atonal violins and metallic scraping sounds meant to mimic claws dragging across stone. It was unsettling, atmospheric, and deeply unusual for a mainstream horror film of the 1980 series. But when the studio heard the first set of cues, they balked. Executives worried that such an abrasive score would alienate audiences, making the film feel too art house or too bleak. They demanded something more traditional, pushing Chataway to soften the textures and introduce melodic themes, particularly for Marty's storyline. What emerged was a compromise, a hybrid of haunting synthesizers and orchestral sweeps that hinted at the darker original soundscape, but never fully embraced it. The strangest part is that fragments of Chataway's rejected compositions still linger beneath the surface of the final mix. Layered quietly beneath the main themes are faint pulses of dissonant instrumentation, barely audible, almost subliminal. Some sound engineers believe these remnants contribute to the film's uncanny emotional tone, making even calm scenes feel slightly uneasy. It's as though the original score is haunting the film from underneath, trying to claw its way back to the surface. Years later, a bootleg tape surfaced with 2 of the unused tracks. Fans who heard them described the music as feral, desperate, and too honest. Listening to them, it becomes clear what the movie might have sounded like if the composer's vision had remained intact. In another version of Silver Bullet, the howl in the soundtrack might have been scarier than the creature delivering it. FACT 20. One of the most quietly controversial choices in Silver Bullet was the decision to reveal the werewolf's human identity relatively early, far sooner than most creature features of its era. In the original script, the mystery was meant to linger until the final act, allowing audiences to suspect several characters and feel the paranoia that grips the town. Stephen King had planned multiple red herrings, subtle hints, misleading clues, and ambiguous scenes designed to keep viewers guessing. But during early test screenings, audiences reportedly grew frustrated by the uncertainty and the studio panicked. Executives believed the film needed a more traditional hero-villain structure, something clear and unambiguous. They insisted on moving the reveal earlier in the story re-editing scenes, so the connection to Reverend Lowy became unmistakable. This shift fundamentally altered the emotional arc of the narrative. Instead of a slow descent into suspicion, the film became a thriller about children trying to expose a monster everyone else refused to see. But here's the irony: the earlier reveal did not remove the ambiguity, it merely changed its shape. Viewers stopped questioning who the werewolf was and began questioning why the town seemed unable to notice. In many ways, the reveal amplified the allegory King had intended, that the real horror lies in willful blindness, the kind that festers in places where faith, routine, and politeness are used as armor against uncomfortable truths. Some fans argue that the early reveal weakens the film. Others believe it strengthens it, turning Reverend Lowy into a tragic figure whose duality is laid bare too soon. Either way, the decision left a mark. Silver Bullet became not a whodunit, but a story about the danger of knowing the truth too early and the fear that no one will believe you until it's far too late. BONUSFACT. There is one piece of Silver Bullet history that almost no one talks about, not because it was lost or destroyed, but because the people who witnessed it chose collectively to let it fade. In the final days of production, the team filmed an alternate ending that shifted the emotional gravity of the entire story. Instead of closing with a triumphant reunion between Marty and Jane, film originally ended in near silence. Marty awakens after the final confrontation to find the town eerily still, as though emptied by something far older than fear. Jane enters the room, but she does not run to him. She stands quietly in the doorway, watching him with an expression that suggests recognition rather than relief. In this version, Marty asks if the creature is truly gone. Jane hesitates. The camera holds on her face, soft, uncertain, almost haunted. She never answers. The screen cuts to black. The intention, according to early notes, was to imply that the werewolf's curse was not broken by death. That evil lingers, migrating, waiting for another vessel. Stephen King reportedly liked the idea of ending on a question, a subtle suggestion that horror is cyclical, not resolvable. But the studio rejected it, immediately calling it too bleak, too literary, too ambiguous. They demanded an ending that reassured audiences and reinforced the triumph of the protagonists. What makes the alternate ending so intriguing is that no full footage has survived. Only fragments remain: 3 still photographs and a few seconds of raw film without audio stored in a mislabeled reel discovered years later by accident. In these glimpses, Jane's eyes seem distant, unfocused, as though she carries a secret the film never reveals. Some fans speculate she was meant to be the next host of the curse. Others believe the scene hints that trauma itself is the real legacy of the monster. But perhaps the truth is simpler. Perhaps the film was once meant to remind us that not every victory is clean, and that some questions are meant to remain unanswered. Silver Bullet remains one of those rare films where the chaos behind the camera is just as haunting as the story it tells. Its flaws became texture, its accidents became atmosphere, and its compromises shaped the strange, uneven beauty that keeps it alive long after its release. Some say the film is a relic of 80s horror. Others see a fractured masterpiece held together by instinct and accident. But the truth, as always, lies somewhere in the shadows. Tell us in the comments which fact unsettled you the most, and whether you think the curse in Silver Bullet ended with the werewolf or simply found another place to hide.